The ANC's National General Council wound up in Durban last Friday with no development really on nationalisation and the rand, but with some movements on the proposed national health insurance. Joining with more shortly will be Jerry Vilakazi. He's the CEO of Business Unity South Africa. In the meantime, I'm joined by independent health economist Alex van den Heever, and joining us from our Cape Town studio, political analyst Daniel Silke. Gents, thanks very much for coming to the conversation. Daniel, how did you see the conference last week, and do you think that President Jacob Zuma came out of it stronger?
Well, I think this was a critical conference for Jacob Zuma. He had to restore his own personal leadership within the ANC. He had to develop a sense of continuity going forward for the balance of his term in office that was up for some degree of discussion before the conference. And I think what he managed to do was he managed to instill a certain style of leadership that we haven't seen for some time from Jacob Zuma. I think he will have satisfied the centrists within the ANC and many of those outside of the ANC and the business community as well. So the conference, I think, was generally a positive for Zuma, although I think the positiveness that we've seen for his stance upon party discipline, the more broad discussionary framework for issues like nationalisation will still come under attack in infighting and policy disagreements going forward over the next 2 years.
Now, of course, Alex, nationalisation, we had your view on the NHI, and of course up until the conference it really was thought that this had been put on the back burner. Do you think perhaps the President scored a point by bringing this through? And you only have to think back to President Barack Obama and the National Health Scheme in the United States a few months ago.
Well, I think there is a sort of a global understanding and a global acceptance that these schemes are certainly up for discussion. Where there are shortfalls in domestic systems like we certainly have in this country, it's a good political issue to tackle. It's a social issue. It also is probably a good rallying cry for ANC members who feel as though not enough is being done from a political point of view to assist the poor. But I think the fundamental point is that we spend a very large amount of our budget on healthcare and on other social services, for that matter, on education, for example, and much of this very large spend is inefficiently spent. And we have a huge problem in terms of the efficiency of our bureaucracy and our systems to cater for the very large budgets that we do throw at these very critical issues. And I think that there's a long way to go between the aspiring aspect of instituting a national healthcare initiative for this country, but also cleaning up our own bureaucracy, cleaning up our act with the money that we already spend in these critical issues. And I think until we get the bureaucracy correct in terms of existing budget allocations, I would be very wary of committing huge amounts of money to something where our systems really are still struggling to cope with existing problems.
Alex, would you agree with that? Do you think it was thought that nationalisation was going to be one of the key issues discussed, and of course that fell off the agenda, but it was brought up towards the end of last week. Now there's been no resolution on this issue, also no resolution on what to do with the rand and the exchange rate, etc. Do you think that the President's just stalling this issue because he doesn't want to make enemies in the short term by taking a firm stand in either direction?
Yes, I think there are two issues at stake. Clearly for Jacob Zuma, what was critical at the NGC was to bring a degree of unity to the party, especially with regards to local government elections next year. The last thing President Zuma wants to have is a fractious ANC alliance when campaigning for the local government elections is going to be critical to the future success of Jacob Zuma. If Zuma does not do well in those elections next year, he becomes even more vulnerable as a president. But I think that was one of the key motivations for not coming up with anything definite on these issues. But I think, too, that Jacob Zuma and the current leadership of the ANC were quite deft and clever in their dealing on an issue like nationalisation. What they did was they took the debate about nationalisation effectively out of the hands of the ANC Youth League. They broadened the debate. Jacob Zuma said, we're opening up the debate on nationalisation to the whole party, and in fact, by that to the whole country to discuss. And whereas nationalisation had become the core issue of the ANC Youth League, now Jacob Zuma has freed up other elements within the ANC to talk about nationalisation, and some are going to say that they don't like nationalisation, just as we've seen in the course of the last few days, Trevor Manuel questioning aspects of it in a much more public and vocal fashion. And I think this is a very clever and commendable way in which the debate is going to be recirculated into a much larger, broader debate where the ANC Youth League and the populists themselves don't have the only say about this issue. And we might see this strategy also unfold for other vexing issues like the performance of the rand going forward.
How about relations, Daniel, between the ANC and its alliance partners, the COSATU and the South African Communist Party? Because I think although President Zuma did show that the ANC was the strategic centre of the alliance, he also tried to mend some fences, and some that were damaged by the recent COSATU strikes.
Yes, again, I think this is all playing politics in advance of local government elections to get the two key components back on track so that they assist the ANC in winning as many local council wards as possible next year. I don't think that this relationship is going to remain a friendly, warm, fuzzy relationship. I think we're going to see ups and downs in the relationship. But for the South African Communist Party in particular, there's nowhere else for them to go. They need the power that the ANC offers them in order to have a say, in order to shout above their numbers. For COSATU, of course, going it alone is perhaps slightly more feasible, but I think that the nature of South African politics currently is that both these alliance partners still see their future role for the moment in a ruling alliance with the ANC. I don't think there's any threat to break up this alliance, and they will try and maneuver their own particular ideological positions, broadly speaking, within the alliance with a president like Jacob Zuma, who they believe they can influence. Now, the real question for the remaining term of Jacob Zuma is, will he resist continued attempts by the alliance partners to influence policy? It looks very much as though he will, and we will wait to see what the centrists in the ANC's economic think tanks come out in terms of a new growth strategy, which I suppose is imminent. And I suspect many of those strategies will be much more centrist in orientation than will be bending towards a communist, populist, or for that matter, workerist notion, given the various inputs from all the various alliance members.
Because, Alex, you came and chatted to both coming in today, and of course Jerry Vilakazi unable to make it into studio this afternoon. That's of course independent health economist Alex van den Heerber and political analyst Daniel Silke joining us from Cape Town. Let's have a quick look at the markets. We currently have